right, well, we'll start without him. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call this evening's regular meeting of the Stoughton Area School District Board of Education to order. Ms. Egan, could you please take the roll?
Sure. Mr. Bouvon?
Here.
Mr. Fry?
Here.
Ms. Fitzgibbon?
Here.
Mr. Jackson?
Here.
Ms. Sword?
You here?
Mr. Sullivan is excused. Ms. Tarkinian?
Here.
Ms. Genter? Here. Mr. Pockler?
Here. Sorry. All right. At this point in the meeting, we would entertain any comments from the public. If anybody is here who wants to address the board, please come up to the podium. Don't see anybody making their way up. So, next up is the legislative updates. Donna.
Yes. So I went to the regional meeting last week and went to the pre-meeting seminar and got looking for this, the 135 slide update on the school board policy implications for the new budget. So,
So just a couple.
Just a couple. And they, some are pretty time sensitive. So I'll be working with Judy to see how we can get those into policy quickly, because some of them actually go into effect right now and some go into effect for the next school year. But for instance, open enrollment and part-time open enrollment and the course options has all changed, and we have to have that in place before the period for open enrollment begins in January or February, is it?
February.
So we would need to have the policy in place by January. So hopefully WSB can help us a little bit with that. Also, our regional director, Nancy Thompson, she has reached her term limits for that position, and so we elected Tom Weber, who's the board president of the Sun Prairie School District, to be our next director, and he'll start in January during the convention. So Nancy's still our director for now. Just tried to put in some things here that I thought you'd be interested in. Hopefully you all got, I clarified the gun issue. I actually talked to our guy last week about that, our legal, and I don't think that was the answer we wanted, but and also I realized that our resolution was not on the website as boards taking action, so I talked to Dan Rossmiller about that, and he's going to make sure he puts that up. So I am doing some research currently on a resolution about the voucher taxpayer transparency bill. I've already been in contact with WASB, and I'm thinking we may try to bring that to the next meeting, but I'll be in touch with you guys probably about that. So that's it.
Thank you, Donna. That's a lot of
Yeah.
Thanks for doing that.
Does anybody have any questions about any of that?
The voucher transparency, could you just elaborate a little more on that?
Yeah, I didn't, it's not in this report because I only was asked about it this weekend, but I have reported on it earlier. There is a proposed piece of legislation out there that would require the state to say how much money is of each budget is going to vouchers.
Okay.
And from what I've just, the first things I've just learned is that it's really not getting a lot of traction because it was authored by Democrats. There's not one Republican that has signed on to the bill. And they thought maybe it was just kind of dead, but it may kind of come up a little bit. But of course, we aren't as affected by vouchers as a lot of other districts, but it does come out of the general fund. So, I mean, in some small way, it does affect us. So there is a push, a campaign by a group to get boards to pass resolutions saying that they support that. And so far, I think there's 2 school districts that I am aware of that have passed such a resolution. So if it's something that we want to pursue, we can do it, but we all know resolutions have minimal impact at times. The other thing is that some school district has actually submitted that to WSB for their policy and resolutions, and it's something that they would bring up at the delegate assembly, which John is going to be at, which would make WSB focus on legislation if that passes. So we're coming at it from a lot of different angles. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Donna. Next on the agenda, with the resignation of Sarah Robb, we do not have a deputy clerk for the Board of Education right now, and we do need to have one. I sent an email out earlier today to everybody regarding that, and I am opening the floor for nominations for that position.
Does the person need to be in attendance to be nominated?
No.
Then I would nominate Frank Sullivan.
All right, is there a second for that nomination?
Second.
Seconded from Yoli. Are there any other nominations from the floor? Are there any other nominations from the floor? Are there any other nominations from the floor? Hearing no response to the affirmative, nominations are closed. Given that there is only one candidate, I think we can do this by voice vote. All in favor of electing Frank Sullivan as our deputy clerk, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And for the record, the chair votes aye. So I did discuss this with Frank, and Frank did say he'd be willing to serve, so that's helpful. Along the same lines, Sarah's resignation also opened up vacancies on the 2 committees on which she was serving, which were policy and employee relations. I'm appointing John to the Employee Relations Committee. Sarah was also the chair of that committee, so I'm appointing Donna, who is currently a member of the Employee Relations Committee, to be the chair of that committee. And then Frank has agreed to serve on the policy committee, so he'll be serving as a member of that committee. And then that brings us to the district administrator's report.
Thanks, Scott. A couple of things that I have. First off is this is going to be a big weekend at the high school. Thursday, Friday, Saturday is the high school's production of Bye Bye Birdie. Always a classic, and so if you have a chance, stop by the high school and see the production. Friday night's going to be a busy night because in addition to the musical going on at Bye Bye Birdie, our football team is also hosting Oregon in the first round of the playoffs. So we expect a packed house in both events. We expect parking will be a premium. We have worked out with the church across the street to allow us to use their parking lot and are asking the Oregon fans to start parking there and then to leave as many spots as we can for both our musical and our sports fans. So also if you have a chance, stop by the high school to see our football team as they take on Oregon in the first round of the playoffs. This last weekend, our North Star was at a conference in Whitewater, and I have to give kudos to Laura Striley, their advisor, and Isabella, because our North Star took second place for all scholastic publications in which they draw from Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois, and that's a great honor. For all their hard work and dedication. And Laura also tells me we had a number of first places won by individuals, and that Stoughton was mentioned numerous times in some of the sessions as an exemplary program where you have the quality of a student publication with the support of the district and the community. So we're proud of our North Star staff and for all they're doing. So again, congratulations on all of that. Also, starting on Thursday the 19th through November 5th, the Germans are coming. As you know, as most people know, we have a partnership with Graven, Germany, where every other year our students go there, and then their students come here. Their students are coming here for, again, starting Thursday, staying with host families. They will attend classes with our students. They will also do some cultural things. They usually go to the Dells and the water parks, and they do a few other things. I'm welcoming them officially on Friday morning, and we'll start classes on Friday. So this is a great program and great experiences for both our students and the students from Germany, and not only the students that are in German class, but all the rest of our students who get a chance to interact with the students from Graven over the next week and a half or so.
So they stay for a week and a half?
Yeah, they're staying here through November 5th.
Oh,
So they leave November 5th. So they'll be staying with their host families through November 5th. And like I said, they'll do some excursions. They go down to Chicago. They go down to different areas. And so we're delighted to host them and have them and the culture experience. Couple more things. In my visitations of schools and different things, last week I got to sit in and experience with a 4th grade class our digital citizen curriculum. In particular, this lesson was around cyberbullying. And what do you do when you see something online where somebody is bullying or making inappropriate or nasty comments in something? And it's interesting because I talked to the 4th grade students as we're going through these exercises, and they aren't online yet as 4th graders. And so they'll tell me I'm not online yet, but they talk through, well, if you did, what would you see? You know, what would you do? And they brainstorm different things that if they saw, you know, somebody putting somebody else down, they're coming up with things like, that's not nice to respond to, or stop it. Occasionally they would bring up something where they would get a dig in on the person making the comment, and then the class would talk through, but then aren't you doing the same thing? And they talked about who can you tell if you see this online, your parents, teachers, etc. So it was a great exercise, and again, I got to spend some time with the students in that lesson of the cyberbullying. It is one of many that we are doing with our students on the different topics around digital citizenship and what you do on the internet. I also had the privilege today of sitting in on the Sandhill leadership team after school in their meeting, and they were talking about their program. They're doing a peer observation program where staff is going into each other's classrooms and observing, and then sitting down and sharing what they saw and giving each other feedback. They did the first round, and then they'll switch now the second round, and great feedback that they got from the people sitting around the table, but also their survey on the value of that, of getting feedback from their peers and getting feedback from one another. So I enjoyed that today, listening to that. And just so you don't think that I don't have any fun with the kids, and let me I'll have Becky show you a video. Let me preference this video and set it up. I was in the playground, and I noticed a kindergarten student all by herself. So I decided to go over there and talk with her and play, and then it kind of blossomed or bloomed from there. So.
Tammy looked huge.
So we started out with one, and then eventually I get kicked off because more people, but that's fine. And I walked away and watched, and for the rest of the recess, that student had this group to play with. And so, like I said, I went over there just to, you know, because I felt bad she was by herself, but then I was having fun, but then I got kicked off.
I really wanted to go there again.
That is, didn't we buy that video of that, everyone has to play, we saw it at the 2 years ago.
Yeah, we have it, yeah.
I can't remember the name of that, but it's sort of the same
Right.
principle. No one is allowed to be on their own.
Right, yeah, and so, yeah, so I have a lot of fun when I get to do some stuff like that. And, you know, my little kid self come out.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is the consent agenda. Yoli.
Oh, I was told that I had like 3 pages.
Oh, they were just pulling your leg.
I move approval of the October 2nd, 2017 board vacancy and regular board minutes. I move approval of the September 28th, November 7th, 2017 check register, October 11th, 2017 P-card transaction report, and the 4K site first half payment as presented. We would like to say thank you to the following individuals and groups and move approval of their donations to the district. $150 from the Stoughton Lions Club, Stuff the Bus event, for students in need, school supplies, and related cash donation budget adjustment for $150. I move approval of the Stoughton Norwegian Dancers 2018 Virginia Spring Tour field trip request.
The consent agenda has been moved for approval. Is there a second?
Second.
That's from Allison. Comments, questions? I will just say that I think this is the very shortest consent agenda that I have ever seen. So, all right. Absent anything else, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that is passed. For discussion items, excuse me, for discussion items, the first up is Erica with the 17-18 budget.
Good evening. Well, we are fortunate in that we now have a finalized state budget, which I wasn't sure about a month ago if we would have that as we move into this time of year. It wasn't until last week that DPI put out a summary of those budget items that impact school districts, which was really nice. So instead of having to read through the entire actual budget bill, they do put a nice summary together. And I looked through that and pulled some of the pieces that I felt might be most relevant for our district, and I did put that into board docs for everybody to read. I'll just kind of go through some of those things, and I'd like to have a little bit of a conversation around, from a financial standpoint, what that means for the school district here for this coming budget year, and then future budgets as well. The main things that I highlighted were the scheduling of school district referenda. In the past, schools have been allowed to have referendum questions on existing ballots for regularly scheduled elections, but we also, school boards had the authority to have a special election if they felt that that was necessary for their school district. And the state budget that just passed basically only allows school district referendums either to exceed the revenue limit or to issue bonds to occur on regularly scheduled election dates. So the spring primary or general election, or the fall partisan primary or general election. Every spring we have an election. It's every other year in the fall that we have a regularly scheduled election. So that will just require school districts to think a little bit about their planning as they're looking for possible referendum questions. The per pupil aid, there is an increase for 17-18 of $200 per student, and another $204 in the 18-19 school year, which brings the total for 18-19 in that particular aid category up to $654 per student. That will drop back to $630 for the 19-20 year and thereafter. At one point in time, the governor had proposed that those increases be tied to school boards requiring employees to pay at least 12% of healthcare costs. There was some ambiguity around what that meant. Was that premium share? Was that out-of-pocket costs? There were a lot of question marks around that. And also that additional funding go directly into individual school budgets. Those particular stipulations were removed during the final budget. So we will receive that increase per student in the district. High-cost special education, there is a special aid that is available for districts that incur certain costs over a threshold for special education, and they're increasing that reimbursement rate up to 90%. It was previously at about 70%. Open enrollment tuition, this wasn't a surprise either. There will be an increase in the amount that follows a student that either leaves or comes to a district through open enrollment for both regular education and special education. There are some new grants that have been put in place. One in particular that I highlighted was the Personal Electronic Computing Device Grant. The way they've structured this is that there's a sum of money that's set aside for districts that can implement one-to-one type technology for freshman students in high school. We moved in that direction this year, and that's something that we'll be continuing to do. So Paul and I will be looking into whether or not that might be something that we could tap into. The grants become available starting in the 18-19 school year, so it's not something that we would have for this year, but possibly for next year. So we'll wait to hear from DPI specifics around what criteria they might put in place, but if that's something that we would be eligible for, that would be something we would certainly look at pursuing. The Wisconsin Parental Choice Programs, Donna touched on this a little bit during her legislative update. As voucher programs have expanded in the state of Wisconsin, they continue to make changes to those programs. What they have done is increase the income threshold for eligibility from 185% of the federal poverty limit up to 220%. So that essentially means that more kids will be eligible to participate in that program. Part-time open enrollment and course options, Donna talked a little bit about this too. I'll just keep my opinion out of this, but I will say over the last 3 budget cycles, they have changed these laws every single time. We used to have part-time open enrollment as an option for kids that wanted to pursue some coursework outside of the school district, and we also had youth options, which was a way to obtain college credit for high school age children. Part-time open enrollment was eliminated, course options were put into place. Now course options are going away, part-time open enrollment is coming back, and then there's also some changes to youth options, and then there's an implementation of a new program. So we just need to figure out what that looks like for us. We'll wait for some guidance from DPI. I'm sure there will be some coming as they kind of figure out what that looks like as well. So we will do what we need to do to comply as soon as we find out what exactly that might be. The main thing that I do want to talk about tonight is that increase in per pupil aid. That additional $200 per student results in about $650,000 for our district this year. We're very fortunate in that we have had the additional referendum funding since 2014, which allowed us to basically create a balanced budget by the time July rolled around. When we went to that referendum, at that time we didn't have any guaranteed increases per student, so we didn't plan on something that wasn't in existence. So that puts us in a nice position to have some additional resources for this year. And then as we start looking at the Finance Committee at our forecasting model, we will be doing that in the next couple of months, but we recognize that that additional ongoing funding will help to defer potential future deficits that we talk about on an ongoing basis. That model looks at a lot of different things, not only state funding, but it looks at projections for our expenses. It looks at our enrollments. We know that we anticipate that we will be continuing to decline in enrollment. But that additional ongoing funding per student will certainly help out as we look towards future budgets. So while it's a blessing that we get this extra funding, it comes in October, which is not an ideal time to have real meaningful conversations around program expansion or those kinds of things. So in doing that, we talked administratively a little bit about what would make the most sense for this year, and then talk about what that looks like on an ongoing basis. And I had made a suggestion in my memo to the board in board docs that we consider putting some or all of those additional resources for this year into Fund 41. Fund 41 is the fund that we use to basically pay for our 10-year capital project plan. It's where we do the majority of our larger scale projects. So when you look at things that we've done, like some of the exterior of the high school, when we've done some I'm just trying to think of things we did this summer, the parking lots, those types of things, those are oftentimes paid for out of our capital projects fund budget. And there's a couple reasons for doing that. Fund 41 is a separate fund, it has its own fund balance, and that goes over, we levy a tax into there, and we carry over those funds from year to year. When you look at the time frame in which we do a lot of those larger projects, it's over the course of a summer, which when your fiscal year ends on June 30th, those projects really span 2 fiscal years. So it's really helpful to have a fund where you can levy into it 1 year and then you can be spending it over the course of multiple fiscal years. It also allows us the opportunity to maintain a consistent levy or a consistent budget for those purposes, and you can kind of save up for larger scale projects. So for example, right now we currently levy slightly over $500,000 that goes into Fund 41. So if we have a large roofing project that we know is on deck 5 years from now, we can continue to levy a consistent amount, allocate those resources for that purpose, and save up to address those bigger projects in certain years. We know that those types of projects, the cost can kind of ebb and flow. You might target a roof in 5 years, but find that you don't actually need to replace it for 7 years, say. So having those funds set aside is helpful just to, maintain consistent funding for it, but then address needs based on when those needs arise. The other piece that's helpful to us in Stoughton is the way state aid is calculated based on Fund 41. So at our last Finance Committee meeting, we actually talked a little bit about the state aid formula and how we as a district are funded. I won't get into the nitty-gritty details, but when you look at the aid formula, there's 3 different levels, and how much aid any one district received is based on the wealth of the district. In the state aid formula, they determine wealth of a district based on property taxes. They look at your average property tax value per student, and we are actually above the state average when it comes to property value per student. So because of that, we are what they call negatively aided. So at the 3rd level of aid, we actually have some of our aid taken away and redistributed to other districts that have property values below the state average. When you spend, the state aid formula looks at what you spent last year, and it reimburses you based on this kind of long calculation. And when you spend in Fund 41, instead of all of those expenses and all those costs going into that aid formula, it's actually amortized over a period of years. And the period of years is based on how long you've had that fund set up. So again, I don't want to get overly complicated, but what it essentially means that instead of spending those dollars and then having them negatively aided the following year, we actually spread out those costs over a period of time, so it will hit us less negatively in the following year. Which is why when we look at big projects like that, if we have to spend $1 million in one summer, spreading out those costs over time is good, so that way our aid formula doesn't, kind of spike in certain years given the kinds of projects that we need to do. So that's another reason why I suggested that for the 17-18 school year, we could look at taking those additional resources and maybe setting them aside in Fund 41 for 1 year. So I'm going to pause a little bit because I know I just said a whole lot in a very short period of time.
Does anybody have questions so far?
So when you have that money, you can kind of think about allocating it to any fund, or there's restrictions about where that money could go?
So are you talking about just the additional funding that we're receiving from the state?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So no, so the additional funding that we're receiving from the state is an aid that we will receive in Fund 10. So, but when you look at our overall operational budget, we already have a balanced budget in Fund 10. So what we can do within our revenue limit formula, again, that really dictates the majority of income that we receive in the district. The revenue limit formula basically covers Fund 10, Fund 41, and Fund 38. So if we take some of our resources within the revenue limit and allocate it to Fund 41, they just won't exist for us in Fund 10. Fund 38 is a non-referendum debt, and we actually have paid all of ours off, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. But because we'll have this additional $650,000 coming into our general fund through our per pupil aid that essentially frees up additional funds that would fall within our revenue limit that we could reallocate to 41 if that's something that the board wishes to do.
And which one is Fund 10? I forgot.
That's our general fund. That's
General
where
fund. Okay.
the majority of all of our operational costs fall.
Steve?
Thanks for the explanation,
Sure.
Erica. When you guys looked at the balanced budget and realized when the state budget was finalized
Yep.
that this extra amount, what were the kind of things you guys were thinking about? Well, maybe we, I mean, is it a short list? Is there something that, like, oh, we really could do this, or is it just not doable?
I would say that every year, you know, I work with our principals and we work administratively to identify things that we'd like to work into a budget. Those are usually things that aren't as grand in nature as like 650,000. It might be, we would like to purchase some additional musical instruments this year. We'd like to work in, you know, we've got like, if shot clocks become a requirement at the high school level, we'll know we'll have to buy those kinds of things. So they're things that might add up to thousands of dollars, which in a $43 million budget is pretty minimal. So we always do that on an annual basis, but something to this extent, we haven't really spent a lot of time talking about, wow, if we just had, you know, $500,000, what would we do?
Yeah.
I will say that one of the things, and I think I mentioned this in my memo too, which kind of led us to the Fund 41 suggestion, we have worked into our budget this year the cost for a facility study. I believe the last time we had one of those done in the district was back in 2002. So we felt it was time to really do that. And in looking at that, we want to incorporate, it's a pretty big process where we look at getting feedback from multiple stakeholders. We look at our current spaces. We look at maintenance, capital type needs throughout the district, but then also like how are our buildings designed to accommodate today's educational environment. And we felt that this additional funding, if we go through that process and identify some things that we would like to do, this might provide some resources to be able to do that. Again, it's not going to build a new building, but it might be able to address some needs that we haven't previously identified. I know one of the things that we've been talking about, that Judy's been kind of keeping us up to date on is, you know, outdoor education. We've talked about STEM opportunities, some of those kinds of things. So there's a lot of conversations going on around, you know, what kinds of things might come out of some of our strategic visions, some of this facility planning. We just wanted to gather a lot of information before we would, you know, move forward on doing something pretty large in scale.
And like you said, it's kind of late to pull the trigger on anything particular.
Well, yeah, and usually if you're going to look at, if you would say like a programming type change that results in a different staffing need or something like that, yeah, you don't usually start something like that in October. That's why we felt like to do something like that right now just didn't make sense. And it wouldn't probably be as well thought out as we would want it to be.
John, do you have any of that?
Yeah, so I was wondering, is Fund 41 the type of fund that you guys would typically pull from like installing a camera system, since that's something we talked about? I'm just trying to wrap my head around.
Fund 41, probably not. When you look at the guidelines around what falls into Fund 41, you're essentially having to answer the question as to whether or not it extends the life of a building. It extends or improves, I don't remember the exact words, but, so cameras probably not.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Alice?
What about air conditioning?
Yep. Yeah, that would definitely be something that could fall into Fund 41. I will say too, when you look at that 10-year plan, we've added air conditioning at both River Bluff and Sand Hill to that plan. We've also tried to work in the high school locker rooms and kitchen area. Those are the two areas at the high school that are still really, once those two areas are done, the high school will be pretty good to go for a while. But those are things that we've added probably in the last 3 or 4 years, and I think Calvin has it worked out how we can accommodate those within our budget, but sometimes those estimates end up being a little bit more than we anticipate too, so a little bit of cushion there wouldn't hurt.
I have one more.
Yes, go ahead.
When you were saying that, you know, moving this into 41, you started talking about STEM activities, so would that not fall under Fund 10 because
Yeah.
it's educational?
No, and
Or would that
that's
be-
just me talking. These are the things I've been hearing. From my lens, when I hear those kinds of things, then I wonder, does that have a facility type impact?
Okay.
I wasn't talking about the actual programming piece of it.
Okay.
That's certainly
But
not my area of expertise.
Right.
Right, you're right. The programming piece of something like that would come out of our operating Fund 10 budget. I was thinking more in terms of, is there a capital,
Equipment and things that we need.
Remodeling a
yeah,
room.
potentially,
Okay.
or, yeah, remodeling,
All
you know, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
First, I just want to say that we are really lucky that we were in a position that we had a balanced budget before
Yeah.
this came out, because there are lots of districts that need this money now. So, we're in a really good place, for that. And the other thing I just want to remind everyone is that this is only a 2-year budget. So, I would caution that we make use this money for any sort of staffing changes, because we may not be able to sustain that.
Yeah.
And the building stuff seems to be, a much better use, only because I think we've done a really great job with our facilities, especially, I mean, my goodness, the last 5 or 6 years, I mean, we've just made great improvements. Our community is really proud of what we have here. And, I think it shows that we are trying to be forward-thinking and, you know, making the best use of this money and saving us some money in the long run as far as the, with the amortization. And air conditioning was like the first thing that I thought about.
I'm thinking heat right now.
It's okay.
Utility budget, but.
Kind of hot in here, so it's nice to have it. I do have a couple questions of just some of the things that you brought up earlier about the things that affect us with the budget.
Yes.
Is that all right? Did I
Yes.
just
Yeah, go
slide back? That revenue limit adjustment for the energy efficiency measures, were we taking advantage of that?
We took advantage of that, I think, the very first year it existed, and I think it's morphed and changed a little bit since then. And we just did some very small things that we had very clear cut metrics to determine the payback. We haven't since, because for that piece that Donna's referring to, there was the ability to basically exceed your revenue limit and add to your tax levy for certain things that would result in energy efficiencies. We didn't really go down that path because our community had already agreed to levy more in taxes just for our operational purposes. And within our utility budget, we were able to do some reinvest into some energy savings. When we save in our utility budget, we reinvest into some energy savings. And some of the changes we made when we borrowed money in the 2010 referendum to do some facility upgrades and improvements, we were able to incorporate some energy savings into that as well. So we did one time, but we haven't recently.
I think the problem was becoming districts were misusing that, saying
To the tune of millions of dollars.
Right, so it's now effectively a 1,000-year ban on
Right.
that. With the veto pen, he was able to change 2018 to 3,018.
So we won't be having, I don't think any of us will be around.
So that's good. The grants that you talked about for personal devices, that also, there's 2 things about that. It doesn't have to be for 9th graders. It's just based on what your 9th grade enrollment is. So you can do things for the whole district, but the amount you're going to get
It's
is
based
based
on-
on what your 9th grade enrollment is.
I did not know that.
And it
That's good to
also
know.
includes software.
Yes, I did know
So,
that.
that was just something that we talked about at our last seminar. The part-time open enrollment thing, I had made a note that they said if you had some trouble writing your, changing your policies, go back to 2013. Because, we're essentially going back to 2013 as far as some of those policies and the criteria. But this has a potential to be really, really huge. I mean, this is could cost us a lot of money, because they're reinstating, a student, a non-resident student can apply to go to to take classes at another district, and then they have to pay tuition to that district. So we could, someone from Oregon could say they want to take our Fab Lab class. DPI is going to set the tuition amount. And for, they can take up, and then the other part of that is the whole higher learning stuff. They can take up to 18 credits a year at our, that we will have to pay tuition for. That's, I mean, that has potential of being huge.
They've also taken
Yeah.
the age limit off because it used to be just juniors and seniors, and now it's anybody in high school.
Okay, so just wanted, those were some questions that came up. The other thing I was just gonna ask, when we were going through this last referendum, and, you know, some folks were pretty upset, saying that the recurring nature of our referendum was essentially giving us a blank check. And that, you know, we said, well, we don't always have to levy the full amount. Is that something that we would be considering, that we don't have to go for all of the referendum dollars if we don't need to? I mean, is there a point where putting, you know, there's got to be like an optical number that we'd want to put in that Fund 41 where that actually is going to save us some money, but if we put too much in, then we're just sort of, you know, it's at a certain point, it's not going to make any difference.
I would say if we would choose to under levy, because we're declining in enrollment, and this gets kind of complicated again. Districts that under levy can carry that forward to the following years, but if you're declining in enrollment, you receive a non-recurring exemption for that declining enrollment, which can then impact your ability to have that carry over the following year. So if we choose not to levy, we may not have those resources going forward.
So we're just going to have to be really careful about how we do all of these things.
I would be really hesitant to choose to under levy, which could potentially impact our per pupil amount in future years.
And, I mean, I think that's okay, and I think we can explain that, and I think the fact that we're basically budgeting for some big ticket items that we would normally have to go to referendum for later on. This seems like to be a very smart idea and frees up some money for us to do some programming things that we may, you know, need to put in place in the next couple of years.
We're also trying to be strategic in extend that big cliff that's moving. And so with our with $0 increase, we were looking at, I think, 1920. We were facing $1 million deficit, and then it increased from there. We're trying to be strategic in how we use our money and how we budget so we can extend that out. One of the things we did when we went to a recurring referendum is we said to the community, if we go to a non-recurring referendum, we guarantee we're going to come back in 4 years. If we go to a recurring referendum, you're not going to see us in 4 years. We're going to do everything we can to extend that out to the cliff. So we've gotten to 1920. I think with this added funding, we can go even a little further. But it'll be, you know, the Baird model and the Finance Committee will look at all that. But we're also trying to be strategic in that, of extend that deficit so we don't have a huge cliff or deficit that we have to cut $1 million or go, if we can extend it out as far as we can.
We will receive, I signed up for the Baird Model Workshop. They have that every year, and essentially they update their model to extend it a year out, and I think I'm going to that in early December. So once we get that, then we'll add our own assumptions and look at different scenarios to talk to the Finance Committee.
Great. Good work, Phil. Thank you, Erica.
Joe, did you have a?
Yeah, a couple questions. So if we choose to put this money into Fund 41, that's a rather permanent decision, right? I mean, we can't draw back out of that for other things. It's
That is correct.
locked in, right?
That is correct, yep.
Okay. And are you proposing that we move all of this money into Fund 41, or would you hold some back for next year, say, early in the year, talking about some of these wish list things that you talked about, or are you talking about the full amount?
My proposal would be for 17-18, we put, because right now we've already budgeted, I can't remember off the top of my head, I want to say it's like 520,000-ish that we budget in Fund 41 every year. My suggestion would be for this additional resource for 17-18 only, we add to our 520 and add the 650 to it. I think then for the following year, we can drop our Fund 41 levy back to what it was, which then frees up those resources to be in Fund 10. I feel very confident that we have adequate resources budgeted in Fund 10 for this year to you know, carry out business that we've planned for the current school year.
Well, the reason I ask is it might be nicer to have those conversations, like we could use a few more musical instruments when that comes up next year, if we say put 600 in, or
Yeah, I would,
550, and then you've got a little wiggle room next, it's just, I'm throwing it out.
when you say next year, are you saying like 2018-19, or are you talking about calendar year?
Calendar year, like when
So
we
after
start
January?
talking about the next school year, and you're hearing things like, we'd like to do some STEM things, or we could use a few more musical instruments. Should we hold some portion of this back so those conversations are easier?
I think when those conversations occur, realistically, those kinds of purchases can easily happen after July 1st with next year's budget if need be. And then I would say that we, like our buildings and our departments are pretty good about watching their budgets and having conversations January, February-ish. If there's some changes in their spending patterns and they're going to have resources available, they have those conversations looking to see if we can pool our resources to figure out if there are some unmet needs that we can address. But I guess I can't speak to, you know, what those things might be. But I will say that on an ongoing basis, we do try to incorporate, again, some of the smaller things into every annual budget for those kinds of, you know, changes to programs or additional needs, whether it's musical instruments. We're actually going to be getting some, actually I'm not going to say because I think it's a surprise, but we're going to have some things that, that we're working on over the course of the year that we do just naturally work into our budget on an annual basis. I think if there are larger scale changes to programming or how we do, I'll just use STEM as the example, I think we could very easily accommodate those changes, you know, purchasing wise in July and August for the following year.
Okay.
I mean, that's just my opinion.
Steve, thank you.
Earlier, right before summer, I think, we took 700,000 and put it into Fund 46.
Yep.
So we're not anticipating, well, I guess my question is the difference between 46 and 41. So you've explained 41.
Yep.
And I can't recall what 46 is.
So
could-
I'm glad you brought this up because they are a little bit different, but they are similar. So Fund 46 was a new fund that was made available to districts a couple of years ago. And in order to establish a Fund 46, school boards had to pass a resolution and then they had to put some money into Fund 46. It could have been $1. And as soon as you created that fund, you started a stopwatch, so to speak. From the first point in time in which we deposited that money, we have to wait 5 years to be able to access it. So we're into year 3-ish at this point. The other stipulation on creating a Fund 46 is that you have to have a 10-year capital plan, which we've always had. So once those funds become available, those funds can be used for things on our 10-year plan. The difference is that for Fund 40, so Fund 41, you're spending basically for the same purpose. Fund 41, you actually levy a tax. And in levying that tax, it still falls within the revenue limit. So whatever you levy in Fund 41 is not available in Fund 10. Kind of going back to what Joe says, it's kind of a permanent decision. You cannot transfer Fund 10 to Fund 41 once you have set your levy. Fund 46 is different in that you don't levy a tax into Fund 46. You literally transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 46. So the example that you just gave, Steve, was that we had some various areas where, well, we had budgeted for $300,000 and then we found some areas in our budget that we didn't spend last year. So we made the decision at that point in time, our Fund 10 fund balance is healthy enough to avoid short-term borrowing. Let's take those resources, transfer them into Fund 46, so that way once that 5-year time period has expired, we will have those resources available to address, you know, air conditioning or whatever it may be that we have on our plan at that point in time. There was also a little bit of strategy in kind of what Tim was saying, because the way our Fund 41 works, where you have to levy it, and essentially what you levy in Fund 41 is not available in 10. If we hit that point in time where we're trying to delay potential referendum questions or budget deficits, if Fund 46 becomes available, we may then be able to choose not to levy in Fund 41 for a year without actually having our capital projects budget take a hit, so to speak. So we can still continue with our work, it frees up some funds that might be available in Fund 10 for a year or two, thereby potentially delaying deficits or the need to make reductions.
Thank you.
Other questions? Allison?
So Fund 46 can't be when it becomes available. We couldn't use it for Fund 10.
Correct.
But we could use it for other capitals.
Yep.
And then the 520,000 we levy currently, we
Yep.
could maybe change that and add that to 10.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying, okay.
Yep. And I don't know that I would do that forever, but you could do it for a year or two just to buy some
Just-
time maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, and the
Alright.
reason why this is kind of time sensitive tonight, because next Monday is when we finalize our levy.
So what, sorry. What do we have in Fund 41? How much money? A lot?
You're gonna ask me to.
That's
I don't-
okay. I don't want to put you on the spot.
I can get that for you.
I
I'd have to
probably
look
have
at
it
our.
somewhere, so I should,
By the end of this week, I could probably recite it, because I'll pull that information as we're planning for our annual meeting. But, I have to look at our fund balances at the end of June 30th,
okay.
and I can do that, I can send that to you.
Tim, we haven't heard from you. Any questions?
No.
I've got a couple then. You just, excuse me, you just mentioned that we have to make a decision on this by the annual meeting, correct?
Well, as I prepare the stuff for the annual meeting, which includes our tax levy isn't going to change, but if we want to allocate these resources to Fund 10, we can either, plug them into our budget somewhere and then decide later how we want to spend it, or we can adopt a budget that isn't balanced, meaning our revenues will exceed our expenses, or we would adopt a budget that would include the 650 into Fund 41, or a combination of the both. So that's kind of why I was, if
Right.
we could decide, if I could have some guidance tonight, that'll help me prepare for Monday night's materials.
And related to that question, and maybe I'm not thinking about this the right way, so please set me straight if I'm not. The per pupil spending, is that actually an increase in our revenue limit? Is that what that's doing, or is that just, oh shoot, just lost it. Direct aid from the state?
It's not an increase in our revenue limit. This is it's a categorical aid. It's a
Mhm.
relatively new aid that was created shortly after Act 10. So no, it is not an increase per student in our revenue limit. It is just a straight $200 we'll receive per student. The student count number is actually pulled from our revenue limit. So it's the 3-year average that we use on our revenue limit. It's that number multiplied by the total of 450, I think is what it results in this year.
Well, I guess the question I have is, if this is per pupil aid, why do we have to worry about whether we're levying through tax revenue for that aid?
We aren't levying for the aid. It's just that the additional aid coming in means we have an additional $650,000 in our Fund 10 budget that we haven't allocated at this point in time. So that will stay in Fund 10. What I'm saying is, because we have that, now when we calculate our revenue limit, we could choose to reduce what our Fund 10 revenue is from that source and move it to Fund 41. But Fund 10 remains whole because we receive the $650,000 from another source. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
So then my next question is there any real disadvantage to just parking this in Fund 10? Obviously, our fund balance will get much, much larger.
Yeah,
But that's money that we can access at any time.
that's true. I wouldn't say that it's a disadvantage. What I would say is that if you, there's a positive aid impact by spending it out of Fund 41. Granted, you are restricted in what you can spend it on. I would also say that when we have had to borrow money, when we've acquired debt, I do a conference call with Moody's, and they really do ask a lot of questions about our budget and our fund balance. And they don't always look favorably upon a district that you know, quote unquote, uses fund balance, which essentially means you overspend your budget. That doesn't mean you couldn't explain that. You could say, well, here's the reason why we did it. But I guess I would say that if our decision to spend would be for something like maintenance or a capital improvement, then I think we'd be better off doing it in Fund 41 just because of the lower impact on our aid. And Moody's has never asked me about a fluctuating fund balance in Fund 41 because that's the purpose of that fund. So I guess it kind of boils down to, you know, how comfortable you are sort of making that decision now to use the resources for our 10-year plan, or if we wanted to set aside and save it in our Fund 10 fund balance. You can certainly do capital type projects out of Fund 10. It's not that you can't, you can. Again, we have just tried to do that out of Fund 41 because of the impact to our aid.
Could we, and I'm not suggesting we do so, but could we put some or all of this in Fund 46?
We could.
I mean, obviously, we
Yep.
can't touch it for a while.
Yeah, we can do that. What I will say is if, again, going back to that aid impact, when we transfer money from Fund 10 to Fund 46, it's an expense in Fund 10 that hits our aid calculation the following year.
Okay.
So that negative aid impact would happen in 18-19 for the full $650,000.
Yeah. I guess what I'd probably like some of my colleagues here, I wish we had more time to talk about this, and this isn't your fault.
Yeah.
I mean, the fault lies a little bit further north.
Doesn't do any good on my fingers.
Because it sounds like there at least potentially are a lot of different options that we could consider. The thing that's nice about the fact that this is the first year of the budget is we know what we're going to get next year. It might be a little bit less if our enrollment continues to decline at the rate it has. 650 times 50 kids is about 33 grand, which isn't nothing, but it's not a huge hole in that. So at least this does give us something that we need to think about from now until the next annual budget. And as Steve pointed out, we're 3 months plus into the current year. It's really too late for any major program additions or anything like that. We do have some personnel expenses that could be going up significantly in the next calendar year. We're in the last year of our insurance deal with SSM or with Dean right now, correct?
Yeah.
So insurance could go up significantly for us. Last I heard, it looks like the CPI, the amount that we will have to negotiate with all our represented employees, is likely to be at or close to 2.5% next year, which is a lot higher than what we've had in the past. So that could mean we'll have to budget for significantly higher staff increases than we have in the last couple of years. Keeping those facts in mind, that we may have a lot more in personnel costs next year, what makes the best sense? To keep some of this in Fund 10 or put the whole thing in Fund 41?
Well, I would say the examples you just gave would be for the 18-19 school year.
Right,
And
right.
I don't know that putting money aside this year would really help that ongoing potential cost. I mean, the only way that would help is if you, again, weren't able to balance your budget and you chose to not reduce expenses. But that's a short-term fix. You know, you can only do that for so long before, you know, you don't have a fund balance left. So again, I guess it sort of lands on where your comfort level is in making a decision that does restrict your ability in the current year. I guess when I had kind of put together this recommendation, my thinking was, again, kind of like what Steve said, here we will be at the end of October, which is for a third of the way through the fiscal year. We aren't likely going to make any significant program type changes that would create a mid-year for something significant in cost. And even if we did, I would always say too that we do have a fund balance in Fund 10 for emergencies or whatever, that we certainly could access. I just, again, I don't ever want to say never, because,
Sure.
you know, you never know what could happen, but,
What would give us the most flexibility? Because again, we're going to have to make a decision with about a week to think about it. And again, that's not your fault.
Yeah.
You couldn't have anticipated this. We've been hearing we were going to get big increases in state aid, but, you know, I've been through enough state budget cycles to see things like that disappear at the last second. So what would give us the most flexibility for this biennium?
I would say the most flexibility for our current fiscal year would just be to leave it in Fund 10. I think flexibility for future years, given that we can already balance this year, I do believe putting it in Fund 41 creates some opportunities in future years. And when you look at the 2-year biennium, again, what I'm suggesting, or what you know, it doesn't matter to me that much, but, you know, if you put it in Fund 41 this year, I would only suggest that that be a 1-year thing, and then we look at what that looks like for 18, 19. But the absolute most flexibility would just to be to leave it in Fund 10.
Okay.
Yep.
What is this?
Sure.
I'm
sorry,
You had your
sure.
hand up before
All right, so I pulled up the budget summary by fund that
Yep.
we used last year at the annual meeting. So I just want to make sure I understand this right.
Okay.
The capital expansion fund 41 had a beginning balance of 690,000, an ending balance of 269, and has revenues of 520,000 going in. So I'm assuming that 520 is what we budgeted for those things. So that would be like money that we just put it, that we
That was
earmarked.
last year's?
Yes.
Yes, so last year's levy was 520.
Right, so, so right now, if we've spent everything that we had budgeted, we, at the end of this year, well, at the end of June, we would have had 270,000, about.
Yeah, and I don't think we spent it all.
So,
So-
about, but I mean, that's just what we were forecasting.
Yep.
So, contrast that with Fund 46. Right now, we forecasted for an ending budget balance of $905,000. So, to me, it would not seem prudent to put that into 46, because we already have a substantial amount in there. With being in 41, what I like Erica's reasoning, because it is, I mean, we already have this year's budget balanced. And so next year, if these costs that we could see for next year, we could adjust our budget by how much we put into 41, because we've already put this money in this year. So we essentially have that flexibility for 18, 19 already.
True.
And then the bonus is that it doesn't affect our aid formula as negatively as it would if we kept it in Fund 10. So, I mean, to me, that seems to be why that makes the most sense. Is that right?
That
I'm
makes sense,
understanding
yep,
it right?
yes,
Okay.
correct.
Joe?
Yeah, I just have a question about this Fund 46 that I've never understood. It's got this 5-year stopwatch
Yep.
in place. Why does it have that? Is it in an interest-bearing account of any kind? Is it making money? What's the idea
little
with the
bit.
5 years?
I don't know. I can't honestly
The
say
law.
that. When DPI created the
Yeah,
fund,
I don't understand the rationale
I think,
behind it. I'm just wondering why it's different. And it's not because it's making money.
well, it generates interest like all of our checking
Well,
accounts do.
nothing's generating any interest
Right.
if it's sitting in the bank, right? I mean,
Yeah,
nothing
a tenth of a
appreciable.
percent or whatever it
But
may be.
it's not invested.
What is the reasoning behind it? I can't honestly speak to that. I suspect it was to create a mechanism for districts to start putting some money aside over a period of time to be able to address some bigger scale projects. I don't know exactly what the reasoning was behind it from DPI's standpoint, but that was one of the requirements. You had to, and that's why we created it right away. And when we first created it, I think we just put like $1,000 in there just so we could start that you know, the stopwatch, so to speak.
Yeah, I remember when we did it.
Yeah, but I guess, Joe, I can't answer specifically.
But there's no financial advantage to putting it in 46 versus 41, or,
I would, no financial advantage. I would say, not at this point in time. There may be an advantage when you're sitting here in May thinking, oh, we didn't spend, I don't know, let's say our utilities were under budget by $100,000. You know, we aren't going to spend that in Fund 10. We would like to set those resources aside for future years. Then we may decide at that point in time that's an advantage. Right now, knowing what we know before we set our levy, I feel like we would put ourselves in a better position to allocate those resources to Fund 41 than Fund 46 at this point in time.
Because we've got about 2 years before we can start touching Fund 46 money.
Correct.
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
So again, given like that
So we'd lock
facility
it up
study
for 2
or other
years.
things we've identified, right, we can access those funds immediately once we've levied there.
Other questions based on all that? So, the decision on this, from the board at least, has to be at the annual meeting along with the other community members who are board. Correct?
That is correct. So if there is a comfort level with the board, and I know it's not on as a discussion action item, if people are comfortable with the concept, what I can do is I can prepare all the information at the annual meeting, looking at allocating those resources to Fund 41. It doesn't change the total tax levy that will be approved at the annual meeting. And then at the meeting following the annual meeting where the board approves the final budget, what I could do is I could prepare that with those resources allocated to Fund 41, and then I could prepare one allocated to Fund 10. And at that point in time, the board can decide how to approve that budget. And then the levy, we'll divide the levy up based on what the final decision looks like.
So that would be at the November 6th meeting, yeah?
No, we have a special meeting
Right.
immediately following.
What I wanted to be sure.
Yep, where we
Right.
approve the budget. So, again, the total tax, at the annual meeting, we obviously show the budget,
Mhm.
and I can certainly speak to the conversation tonight, but I would prepare those slides as if those resources were going into Fund 41. But again, if the board would wish to further the conversation and would have a change of opinion, at that point in time, we could certainly approve the budget by sliding those back into Fund 10 if that was what we wanted to do.
Any comments or questions from anybody on that proposal,
General
Steve?
comment,
Yeah.
I think we might want to give ourselves some flexibility. I'm not suggesting all of the money stay in Fund 10, but maybe some money stay in Fund 10. It's just a gut
I'm a little bit there myself.
feeling.
Well, and Erica, you can clarify. I'm not saying that's a bad idea, but if I'm correct, we have a pretty large fund balance right now.
We do. We've been able to successfully avoid short-term borrowing for almost 10 years. And I think our board policy identifies at least 20%, and I think we're closer to 26-ish.
Yeah, so we may not really even need to do that.
Okay, well then maybe it might be nice to see a little summary with
Yeah,
that
I agree.
information.
I agree. If you could do that, that would be nice.
And thanks, Donna, for reminding where that information was.
It will,
on-
yeah, it's all gonna be there this week.
Yeah.
Yep. And what I can do is, I'll get that stuff done as
We
quickly as I
have been
can this
dinged
week.
on our audit, haven't we, in the past for having too high of a fund balance? No. I thought they'd mentioned it in some,
That it was too high?
whatever it is, I just remember them mentioning it, so I don't know if it was positive or negative or.
I think they mentioned we're
neutral.
within board policy.
Okay.
Where it is.
Yeah, I don't remember. I know, yeah. I guess I don't know.
For our fund
The
balance.
In Fund 10.
Yeah.
Any questions or comments?
Tons,
We may
but
not see this.
we don't have time to keep going on that.
Well, no, we got to make the call on this at the next meeting, 1 week from today, so whatever you need to make your decision.
But am I clear in thinking that after the annual meeting, we will have some discussion about this as a board?
So when the annual meeting is concluded,
Right,
there is
we
a
have a
special
special
board meeting where the final final levy is approved, the final budget is approved. So at that point in time, yeah. And unfortunately, because Fund 41 is its own levy, that's why we have to have a decision, by that night, because we have to actually set our levy and send it to the municipalities.
But does that not get approved at the annual meeting? Will we not be locked in then at that point?
The total levy is approved,
The total levy?
Yep.
Not the breakdown?
yes. But I want to be transparent in that the information we present in order to, for people to vote, we show them how we've created our budget, we show them where that levy falls. And I can certainly speak to that. I can just identify that, here's what's on the slide, here's the conversation that we've had. The board will be meeting after the annual meeting to finalize the budget, which would include that breakdown in the levy. But I want to be very honest in what I say. I don't want to mislead anyone.
Well, I guess the hesitation I'm having, Scott, is, and this sounds funny as the facilities chairperson, but we're talking about taking a lot of money, again, putting it into an account that's for buildings, stuff, that kind of thing, and not so much people. And we have negotiations that are going to happen. Well, we don't call them discussions, whatever we call
Sure.
them. We're not talking about money for that, so that's why the flexibility is a little more appealing to me, I guess.
But there is flexibility, Joe, because then we just,
I know,
we don't budget as much for facilities the following year.
I get it, yeah.
Because we have the money sitting there.
It's in the
So
bank,
it's already, it's in the bank, so I think I would actually argue it gives us a little more flexibility.
And I can see that side. It's just because it's a little rushed and, it's a lot to take in right now and say, yes, tell the public that this is the will of the board.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's the point that we need to clarify is that, that 520 that goes into Fund 41, we can change that in the next budget. And we know that we're also going to get another 600 or so thousand
Right.
in the next fiscal year, starting in July.
Right. On top of this
Right,
amount.
right.
And make a much smarter decision on then what to do
Correct.
with a larger sum of money.
Right,
That's something that we can sustain.
right, right.
I will
Yeah,
say
I
this
mean,
is
it would
the-
be nice if we'd had 6 months to consider this. We just,
Right.
we didn't, and that's that's not the fault of anybody here.
I will say, it is really nice to have a conversation like
Yeah,
this.
no
because We
kidding.
don't do that very often.
Yeah, when you
It's usually the
consider
other way
that 10
around.
years ago, we were closing the school,
Right.
right?
Sure.
One more thing, I just want to, kind of going off what I've heard you and Joe saying, with this idea of this partial open enrollment, if we suddenly have a bunch of students decide to do this, are we going to find ourselves outside of our budget this year?
I really don't think so. We do
Okay.
budget for mid-year open enrollments pretty conservatively, because as kids choose to leave, we have to be able to address that. I totally agree with what Donna has said, in that there's potential there.
But it doesn't
But
go
there's-
into
but
effect
there's-
until the 18-19
Right,
school
and-
year.
That's one more, okay.
We've had
But we just
part-time
have to
open
know.
enrollment in the past. There's always
Okay.
challenges. There's transportation challenges, because sometimes you literally have to go to another district to take a class. I mean, there's reasons why it doesn't necessarily turn into a giant free-for-all.
Okay.
So while I have concerns around the language in some of that legislation, I'm not like overly concerned that all of a sudden we're going to be
It's gonna be
facing
a
a
game
huge
changer
cost
for us.
in
And
sales.
to just add, the Assembly Republicans were not happy actually with some of those things, and they
They may change.
introduce legislation that would negate it, or, do something different to it. So, I think we just kind of have to wait and see. But we still have to be prepared policy-wise.
Right, okay. I just wanted to make sure we weren't gonna
I mean,
get
there's always
caught out.
stuff like that that we do, that can happen. And we
Okay.
do plan for those kinds of things.
Okay, does anybody feel they're gonna need more information from Erica before next Monday, when we have to make a final decision on this.
No, but
Again, it's rushed, but, you know, it's not to be helped, unfortunately.
I will say it's a refreshing problem
Yeah.
to have for a change. Amount of time I've been on the board is that we've never been talking about what to do with
Extra
money
money.
we didn't think
Yeah.
we were gonna have.
Let's thank to election year.
That's coming.
Yeah.
I won't comment.
It just did.
Well, you know, and like I said, it's likely that we are going to have some personnel expenses that are gonna be higher than what we've had the last couple of years, so.
I will say, I've already heard some caution that, again, just because the comment was made that this is an election year, that when the next state budget that rolls around,
Yeah.
we may not be so lucky.
Absolutely,
Absolutely.
right.
So again, it's good to have those resources, looking at the future, knowing that we're continuing to decline, not knowing that there will be additional resources, you know, continuing to come in. I think it just, it causes just some food for thought around how we plan and as we commit those resources, how do we commit them and are they sustainable? I just think those are important things to talk about.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Yeah,
I
thank you.
think I get to stay put.
All right, next up, the enrollment update. Who's that? Oh, that's
That's
you
just me,
too.
yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yep. I felt like this was maybe a little out of order. I probably should have talked about this first because our enrollment really drives our budget. But we included a summary of our total enrollment in board docs by school. Sand Hill always looks a little wonky just because we include our early childhood and 4K enrollments in that building. But when you look at the total as a district, we're down 52 kids compared to last September. When I took a look at the numbers, nothing really jumped out at me too much, with the exception of our current freshman class.
Yeah.
That cohort grew from 8th grade to 9th grade. Over half of that growth was due to, I think, St. Anne's kids coming into the school district. So I think it was about 30-ish kids that class grew. About half was St. Anne's and the other half was just move-ins from different places. It was just kind of interesting that it all kind of landed for the most part with that cohort. I also made a note about our open enrollment. I know that has typically been a question that the board has asked. We have a total number of kids leaving our district of 225 and a total of 81 kids coming into the district. So our total net loss for 17-18 is 144 students, which is up from 16-17 where we had a net loss of 128.
Questions from anybody about any of that? Done.
Even though the number looks higher, I mean, I think we are slowing, the rate is slowing.
I would say over the last couple of years, the growth in that gap has slowed.
I mean, we just have to understand, someone who open enrolls is not gonna, they're probably gonna stay open enrolling out, so that's gonna just perpetuate. And then if they have other children in the family, they're gonna go with them.
Yeah, that's usually pretty true.
Pretty true.
Yeah.
So I think the thing we have to, that what's most important is that we just track the rate. And as long as we're trending, I mean, it's not spiking, we have to take some solace in that. And the number coming in has increased.
Yeah, that has increased, yep.
Do we do like an exit interview for students? I mean, do the families get they make any notes, surveys, or anything?
It's not,
Explaining?
I would say, I don't think we, and I guess Timmy can probably speak to this, I don't believe we do any kind of an exit interview. We have done surveys a couple of times. We actually did one last year. School Perceptions did a survey. We've not found that there's not like one silver bullet response that we get. I think it's important to remember too that sometimes people are actually leaving the district. Kids that have attended here, you know, in the past leave. It's not uncommon though for kids, maybe who have never even been in our district, to open and roll out. And parents give a number of reasons for that, ranging from things that, you know, based on their perception of what we provide, to daycare convenience where the parent may work. Sometimes it could be too where maybe I live in McFarland, my kids have always gone to McFarland, I just bought a house in Stoughton, I want my kids to finish in McFarland because that's where they started. So there's a lot of different reasons why people choose to open and roll out. So it's not even always that, you know, people we've known or had before. But to my understanding, the only, you know, contact we've had regarding those decisions has been through the surveys that we've done.
We also, though, target, if they are opening and rolling out to a virtual school, we also contact them to say we have the virtual options here as well. Sometimes that works and we're able to get the students back, sometimes it doesn't, because we also know that unlike some other schools across the state who you apply to a virtual school and they'll take you regardless, and we want to make sure that the student's going to be successful in a virtual school. Not every student is going to be, you have to be self-driven and kind of some of the attributes. And so sometimes we will have conversations with families that we don't think this is a right fit, and sometimes they open and roll out to like McFarland's virtual school, and within 2-3 months or by semester time they're back because they're not succeeding at McFarland's virtual school, so they're back to the brick and mortar because what we told them was going to happen played out. They're not ready to go full-time virtual yet. So we do reach out to the ones that are going virtual, that we do have that option.
Other questions? Alice?
Do we have a breakdown by, maybe it's here and I'm missing it. Do we have a breakdown by elementary, like whether we're gaining or losing it? And, you know, is there
A net gain or loss by grade level?
well by school?
You know, but
We'd essentially have to go through those who are open and rolling out and
You talking
identify
about open
what
enrollment?
attendance area
No.
they would fall into.
Yeah, I don't mean open enrollment. I mean like from year to year. Do we? It
Total
seems that-
population of the school?
Yeah, it seems like at some point, I know we've had some data that I thought showed
Mhm.
changes by school and just total enrollment.
Oh, total enrollment?
Yeah.
We could do
listed
that.
right there. I mean, isn't
Is
it
it?
listed
We
there?
could.
I mean, it's got Kegonsa, Foxbury,
Yeah.
Sandhill.
But it doesn't
It
compare
doesn't
this year
show
with last year.
like
You
last
just
Oh.
pull out, I mean, we do this every year. this
Yeah,
time of
I mean, we
year.
could
Could just look at the old
Just-
Yeah.
reports.
We could do that. I will say that after we closed Yahara, the 3 elementaries were actually very similar in size for a number of years, within like about 20 kids. And it's really only been over the last 3 years or so that, for whatever reason, Sandhill has grown a bit in population, and the other 2 have shrunk a bit. I don't know if it's based on some of the new houses that are out there.
Yeah.
I was thinking probably there's a lot more development.
You know, last time I looked at that, the number of kids in some of those new houses, it actually wasn't a ton, it was like 15 or something, but that was a couple years ago, so I know that they built
Yeah.
some more out there, so.
It'll be interesting to see Nordic Ridge,
Mhm.
which is behind Fox, is starting to develop, and they're going to be on the parade of homes again next year. And the homes that they're developing for the parade of homes next year will be on the park, and the splash pad will be installed. So it'll be interesting to see if that starts to grow. And then the city is trying to get access to the Kettle Park, working with the DOT, the developer, and the town of Dunn, whatever township is,
Rutland.
Rutland,
or
thank you.
Rutland.
to get access in there. And if they can get access, they think the developer then will start phase 3, or the more houses in that, so that could drive. I'm looking forward to the day that we talk about, we have this development and we may need to look at rebounding, and because Fox is getting, I look forward to that day.
Where would that?
I look forward to more
Kettle Park
kids having
West
that conversation.
go?
I think Cal Park West is still
Fox.
slated Fox.
So isn't Fox though getting isn't it kind of pushing it, at least in some grades?
Yeah, I mean,
We're down to about 3 sections in every grade level at class,
Yeah.
which is,
We have room to.
we have a
add
little bit of room,
sections?
yeah.
Okay.
Other questions?
But that's things that the facility studies will look at as well.
I don't need to know tonight, Erica, but if you could maybe send us as a follow-up, a breakdown of the different age levels for our open enrolls in and out.
okay.
I know that we've done that before, so I'm assuming the data can be obtained.
Yeah.
I'd just be
Sure.
curious to see that. And then Jedi, is that up or down from last year?
It's up.
That's what I thought too.
It's up a fair amount. It was 14, I think, last
Yeah,
year, and now
that's
it's
what I thought.
27.
Okay, that's good. Good. Yeah, obviously, a lot of the change came from a really huge graduating class last year. That group of kids was, you know, a lump moving through the district for 12 years, so.
Yep.
And we knew this was gonna happen. They graduated and we dropped below 1,000 at the high school.
Yeah, for the first time in
Ever.
ever.
I
Long
mean,
term.
it's,
To the point that, you know, it also, we were on the verge, football playoffs, they look at your third Friday count. And we are, one of the smallest schools in Division II, so it affects all across the board as far as your enrollment, as far as athletics, and it affects, you know, our revenue, and it affects.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, other questions on the enrollment? All right, thanks. All right, and then staffing report, that's gonna be Becky.
good evening. Okay, so lots of numbers and more lots of numbers. So I'm going to start out looking at all staff in the district. Trying to get organized. This podium is not. Okay.
Actually, sorry.
I'm sorry.
They're having the same problem I was having. So
Yeah,
I'm
I
just-
can't open up the
So
news.
go to Google Drive,
Okay.
your little, and
You
then
have to
Drive.
download it.
You can go,
It'll show up in your Google
you
folder.
can go
Here?
here.
And then go from there to Google Drive.
It's the same that Becky emailed us earlier.
Did you find it?
And
Are you
then,
finding?
I just looked in the email.
On that,
and then where do you?
Drive.
Oh, in the Drive, okay, fine.
But I was able to open it up before. Is this a revised one from the weekend?
I was able to look at it
I
this
don't, the
afternoon.
sheet, what I'm going to present is revised.
Okay.
Oh, that's why.
That's everything here after.
But what was mailed was a PDF version.
Right, and I can't open it now.
Just,
That's okay. I'll
Becky
just
sent
watch
an
it.
email this afternoon with the
Oh.
attachment of the presentation, so you can just.
Okay, I didn't know that because I haven't
Open
looked
that
at
up
it
too.
since 5 o'clock.
Being clear which deck.
Two ways.
Yeah, better give us a minute here, Becky.
Yeah.
You got it.
Yeah, I do now. All right, I'm ready. Is everyone else ready? Okay,
set?
thanks.
Okay, all right, I just wanted to start by reviewing the district mission statement. It sounds like most of you have had this, so I'm not going to read it. It hasn't changed, but foremost in our mission is that students are our number one priority. The next slide is one that I revised. I did have a question about when we looked at the total number of staff, how many educators were represented by that number. And so now there's a slash at each one. So You can see for this year, we have a total of 425 staff, 252 are educators. And we have, you can see our enrollment has declined throughout the years, but our staffing level right now is very similar to what we had in 11-12, for lots of various reasons, but our staffing level is again up just a little bit. When we look at employees by employee group, this is not FTE, this is looking at a head count. And so you can see that we're pretty stable from where we were last year. I don't know how you want to handle this. I would just say if you have questions, just I'll look up and let you know if you have any questions as we go. Then if we take a look at average years of service in Stoughton, in all employee groups, we are younger than we were last year. So we've had some retirements, we've had some turnover, and so that has affected all areas. So we're just slightly younger than we were last year.
Good question, Becky.
Yes.
Does the educator number include the 4K teachers?
No.
Okay, but the students, the enrollment does?
I don't know.
Yeah, it does. The
All
30,
4K?
the 3,060 does, but the teachers, the educators does not. Okay.
So then we take a look at new staff to the district, and we've had some additions, again, in all areas. Bus drivers, I just want to point out, because I know you heard a lot about bus drivers this year. We did hire 4 bus drivers, however, only 1 is new to the district. The other 3 were bus drivers who had retired or left and chose to come back. So we're up one new person. Okay, now I'm going to go on, I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, so we have 41 vacancies on educators?
In educators, we filled 41, yes.
Oh, you filled?
Yes,
I
yeah,
thought
this is not current, this is what we have filled. We
Oh,
are
okay.
totally full right now. Well, that's not true, we just had a custodial resignation, but for the most part, we're full. All educators are full. So now the next section is information only pertaining to educators. Wanted to start out talking a little bit about the teacher insight. This is an instrument. It is an instrument that has been researched and developed by Gallup. And what it does is that right now, it started out when I started here in the district, we were using the teacher perceiver, which was a Gallup product. And then over time, they have moved to an online, pretty much of the same thing. But it is a pre-screener. It does not take the place of an interview. It does not make a determination about who we're going to hire. However, it can help us sort a little bit who we want to bring in for interviews. So we basically present the candidates, and it is a numeric value. We present the candidates, and the best use of the instrument would be to look at the qualifications, but start from the top and work your way down. It does not work very well in hard-to-fill areas, because in those positions, you know, I'll be honest, in some of those positions, we had very few candidates, and so we interviewed and chose the best person we felt could work with the students and fit in the building. Interview teams always include the principal and a team. It's generally the educators that will be working with the person that's being hired. So that's a little bit about Gallup. I have a personal goal, and it's been a Studer goal, that I would hope that we could maintain an average of 75 on the teacher insight. I was very doubtful that we were going to be able to do that this year, simply because we had so many areas that, you know, learning strategists was another area. There just were no candidates. School psychs, we had a position, we actually filled it with a social worker. So there were just, we're seeing the pools in education, and this is not just Stoughton. Pools in education are getting much smaller. And so once your pools are smaller, you're not going to have the same availability of looking at people that maybe meet what you're hoping it will meet. But the good news is, we'll get to that, we did meet our goal. They have not put out the 2017 data yet, but when I looked at the 2016 data, we had almost 700 candidates apply, and oftentimes those candidates apply for multiple positions. And when they took a look at the average score of our candidates, 73 is a really good score. So when you look at that was the total number of all of our candidates who've ever applied here, I think it's fair to say that we are really attracting some very high potential candidates. So here was the scores over time. So we did meet an average of 77 last year. Yeah, Donna. Go back?
Well, I mean, is this it for the
Yep.
insight?
Yes.
So, I've asked this, I know, in past years.
Yeah, I know you have. It's
What
why
is our data that proves this?
What is our data that proves this?
What data do we use that proves that this insight score of 75 or more
Okay.
is working?
Yep.
And have we, you know, I
There-
think I've asked if we could do this before, like take some of our, you know, top-notch teachers that came before this ever was instituted, what kind of insight score would they have that we, you know, they're proven? I mean, I'm not questioning it, only that I mean, we say that some of our students aren't good test takers, and this to me, I mean, this would almost apply, I think, to some people. I feel like we may be missing out on.
Well, first of all, I can't see the questions. That's one thing. It's copyrighted, but it's not informational questions. It's not going to ask you the capital of Texas.
Mhm.
This is getting at the potential that a candidate, it's predicting high potential to increase student achievement. So it's not 100%, but I guess the way that I look at it, there are a number of pre-screeners out there. Gallup is one. And for me, the way that I look at it is that I'd rather have something that might potentially be providing us the best educator in every classroom than nothing at all. And we're just kind of bringing people in and hoping. I mean, in an interview, you do your very best to try to figure out if that person is going to meet the needs of that hire and also work with that staff. I will be the first to tell you this is not 100% perfect. We have had some people who have not scored very well, and I would consider them excellent educators. And I've had some on the other end where they have scored very highly and not really very good in the classroom. But I'm not sure that that means that they didn't have the potential. It may have meant that they just didn't develop that potential. So Donna, I did look at this because I know you have questioned this in the past. And so this is some information about Gallup, and this would be my reason for using it. It is based on research that they have done over 40 years. And within that research, they have evaluated or looked at, assessed over 3 million educators. They've conducted 500 different studies, and all of this was to help them inform the predictability of what might be in the heart and soul of an educator so that person could be effective in the classroom. They found that the very best teachers, and looking at the attributes of the very best teachers, they are educators who take student success personally. They enjoy setting goals and monitoring progress. They develop strong relationships with students. They're energetic, positive, and enjoy communicating with students. They are thoughtful and creative, and they establish a sense of order in the classroom. They also then, so those are kind of the attributes that they would be looking at, and then they take and they divide that into 3 different dimensions. And the 3 dimensions are achievement, student and parent relationships, and classroom structure and planning. And what they have found is that teachers who score in the upper quartile
in an elementary building are 1.86 times more likely to be top performers and improve student achievement. And it's higher at the middle level than it is 2.76 times more likely. And at the high school level, it is 5.41 times more likely. So the reason that, when I came here, I didn't know a thing about it. But we were using it in this district. And the more I learned about it, and the more that I have seen the educators that we have brought in, like I said, it is not 100% guaranteed, but I do feel that it is a great place to start. And it is a great place when you have a couple hundred educators. It's a great way to pre-screen and get a start on who you might be bringing in.
One other question then, since have we been doing this since 2010?
Since 2010.
The year that you showed?
Oh, no, we've been doing it, well, the scores. So if you go back to what Gallup used to use, it used to be called the perceiver, and it was then an oral exchange between the hiring administrator generally and the candidate. And we were taught for different things to listen for, and you ranked them, and we made our own determination. Then, and I think they probably moved it down to before 2010, but I think they started doing this in 2003, where they moved it to an online, and then they improved the online version.
So from whatever time that we've been using it online, where it's not administered orally,
Yeah.
is there any way we could just track how, the people that we fight, their scores and their, retention? We could look at how many of those people are still working? How long did they work here with us? Do we have some sort of, did any of them end up on an improvement plan? We have to have some sort of an idea, of evaluation, like how good, how good it was a predictor.
Gallup, the Teacher Insight does not have anything to do with retention. It is only the ability for the educator to increase achievement in the classroom. So I can look at that, but that really isn't that's not why it was created. I can tell you, just because I know of all of the improvement plans, there has not been anyone on an improvement plan that has scored what I would consider kind of our cut score.
But we aren't tracking it, per se.
Track of what?
You're just not keeping track of...
I am keeping track of our hires. It's not in their personnel file, but I have kept track of who we're hiring and what their score was.
And I don't mean it in terms of retention, that it predicts retention. I just mean it in how are we able to retain those teachers that scored really high? And is there a way for us, can we keep track of that? Because we have heard from people from other, from people who come and talk to us and from other districts that we are losing some good folks because we did such a great job training them here. Do we have some, we just don't have any data around any of this, and I just think that it's easier to make some of these decisions if we actually have something to back it up other than we just know.
I'm just confused about the retention piece and how that fits in here. I think that's a whole nother issue. I think retaining staff, regardless of what their number score was, is something we need to work on. And I think there are things that we could demonstrate with data that way. I don't see the correlation here between retention and the insight score. Because maybe someone who didn't have quite as high an insight score, I'll go back to what I said originally, I think some of those people are excellent educators. So I wouldn't want to necessarily, I just wouldn't want to even do that to people, for them to even realize that we know what their score is. We don't know. I know what their score was. It would be in their application if you went into weekend as an administrator. But it is not something that we keep in a record anywhere.
Okay.
Other questions on that, Yoli?
How do we do that for new teachers that just graduated and how, that these Gallup make questions that are, that will extrapolate in the future how that potential teacher is gonna be because it's a new teacher.
Mhm.
So how can we
Well,
do
that's,
that?
because what it does, the best way that I understand it is I 100,000,000% believe not every person is meant to be an excellent teacher. And so even when you look at what's going on with licensing, I think that's really sad that we're starting to water down what we're doing with educators. But I do believe it's a talent, it's a skill. And it's a talent and a skill that can be developed maybe in me and not in someone else. And if you have that talent and skill, those are the kinds of things that come out in the questions that Gallup asks. Again, it's not about facts and figures. It's really about what would you do? How do you feel? I'm just going back on, I keep looking at Tim because he and I were both at different times trained in the perceiver when we actually asked questions. And it was really looking for, listening for teachers that were empathetic and teachers that could think differently. And so those are, how did they create all this? I'm not 100% sure, but I do believe it's a really reliable organization. And with the number of people, the number of tests that they have been through, I do think it's a tool we can use, and that's all it is. It's just a tool.
It's just a tool,
Yeah.
yeah. It's just because I'm thinking, for example, the test we take for, I think it breaks on mayors for personality, for example.
Okay, yeah.
When you see a person is very introverted,
Yeah.
but can develop, really can work in an extroverted way if the person is exposed to it, for example.
Mhm.
So people also can have flexibility. I just want to make sure that we're probably, like, kind of was saying, we're not losing probably good candidates, especially right now when we are in a position that we shouldn't be losing candidates. That we are using that tool in a way. I trust your experience, but I was just curious about how that can be used.
I would say that I real often hear from buildings, these are such great hires. And that, I really believe the people we are bringing in are great hires. I think I stand here every year and just tell you how wonderful our staff is. And I think that's because we work really, really hard at trying to do the best job we can in hiring and finding these people. And it's another process where there's no 100% guarantee. There's not a right and a wrong. We just do what we think is best. And I think it has served us well. We surely have great people that are working in our buildings right now.
Well, I believe, I believe that we are hiring the right people. I'm hoping that we are not leaving some people out that could potentially be good.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, I understand.
I would just say, I hear what you're saying. My understanding is, so you have, because I have some experience with, you have a job opening, you get a lot of applicants.
Right.
And this helps you
Just,
to narrow that down.
right.
So I hear what people are saying, but if you get 500 applicants, I think these are good systems. I applaud you for using it. I believe most districts do this, something like this. And so I hear what people are saying, but I do think it's sufficient. I would rather have administration spending their time on other things than literally going through 500 applications. And I think if there's a tool you can have in place to help narrow it down a little bit, that's nothing but positive.
Other questions on that? John?
Yeah, so the way you're describing this is that this test is just part of the hiring process, right?
Correct. It's part of the application process.
Right. Is there anything else you'd like to say to help enlighten the board on the rest of our application process and the other aspects of the application process that you think helps us find exceptional educators and exceptional staff, just to maybe alleviate some people's concerns about seeing just a blind sort of number.
Yeah, I appreciate that,
as
yes,
your
because it's
component.
really, it does not
Mhm.
boil down to that one
Yeah,
number.
yeah.
So, yes, what we do is the candidate applies. There is a score that is associated with that. We do look for a complete application, which would include reference letters, it would include a cover letter, credentials. And then pool is then screened by the hiring administrator. So a slate of candidates is brought forward, and that administrator, and I would say this about all of our administrators, I think a lot of it also really depends on the quality of questions that you ask. You can have some really low-level questions, and you can just kind of fly through those. But I really believe that our administration puts a lot of thought into this and really thinks about the questions that they want. It always involves a team of people, and like I said before, it's generally the people that are going to be working with this individual, so it's someone from the department or from the team. And then sometimes in some of the buildings, they will actually have them do a demonstration lesson of some sort, and if they can't make up their mind, they may have them come back, but there is a second interview then that is scheduled between Tim and myself and the principal that is hiring. So that candidate does come back for a third interview, or second or third interview, for the most part. Now, there have been times when we're getting close to the end of the year and maybe Tim's out or I'm out, we're not gonna lose someone because it gets very competitive toward the end too. So there have been some candidates that maybe the two of us have not met as a second interview, but for the most part, that's what our process is.
Okay,
Thank
thank you.
No, thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah, sure.
So I see 697 candidates applied for positions in Stoughton, and you mentioned that the candidate pools that we're seeing now compared to years past is steadily shrinking.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
That's very fair.
I'd be interested to see how many candidates we have for different types of positions. Is that data that we would be able to
Yes.
acquire or
What I
assemble?
could do is just go back through our different postings and
Yeah.
and numbers. Is that what you're interested
Yeah,
in?
absolutely.
And what I'll give you is numbers, but in some of it, like a learning strategist,
Mhm.
we do have two, I believe, right now that are in the district on an emergency license, meaning they're not certified, but they're in the process of going through the program and getting certified. So I can provide that for you, the
Yeah.
number of certified candidates that we have and then non-certified. And we interviewed some of the non-certified in some of those positions.
Okay, yeah, that would be great, thank you.
Anyone else? I just have a question about the screening. I agree that when you're dealing with hundreds of applicants, you've got to have some kind of screening process to get efficiencies. And I know that the goal is to have, out of the aggregate, a score of 75 or better each year. Do you interview then, you must, I'm assuming, interview people who have less than a 75?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And what's that based on? Because it's a particularly difficult
Right, if we
position to
have,
hire for? Or?
yeah, if we have a handful of candidates, we just leave it wide open.
Okay,
We have to.
right, okay.
My other point is sometimes it's really hard to, what I have found over the years is, and I have found this personally myself, someone will say, well, I know Becky really well, so you should go apply at Stoughton. Well, that's not the reason I should hire you. I mean, but it's really hard for people to say, oh, well, we're not going to bring you in. So this does give principals, I've had to use it myself with people who think they have it in because they might know who I am. It gives us a rationale, it gives us a process for what we do and an explanation. Some people don't like it, but at least it's honest.
Right, okay. Anything else in that,
Come
Joe?
back.
Yeah, do these educators know these scores? I mean, do they know what their score
I
is
don't
when
think
they
they
come in?
do. No, I don't think they do.
Okay, so there may be some of them out there wondering why they never get interviewed. Is that?
Yep, and you know what, we have had people who there, there are some that contact us multiple times to find out why they're not interviewed. And we simply say that we go through a very detailed screening process, and they simply did not make the screening at this time. I mean, we never discourage someone to think that they can never work here, but at this point in time, they didn't make it through the screening process.
Okay. Thank you.
I just thought maybe looking at the number of educators in a building might give you just a little bit of information when you're looking at the number of fills and vacancies that we've had. So this is just informational numbers here. And so we'll just look at who was hired in each of the buildings. Again, these are just the educators. Fox only had one. It was our lowest. She did have more vacancies, but we actually had some transfers into Fox, which made vacancies in other buildings. So this does not include transfers. If people wanted to move around, I didn't list that as a vacancy.
Peggy, when you say transfers, does that mean people that moved by choice, or is that potentially somebody that Tim thought would be better fit in a different school?
Yeah, this year it was transfers. The other one we call a reassignment. Okay. And we have done those in the past for various reasons, but we didn't have any reassignments this year. Excuse me, that is not right. We did have some reassignments with educational assistants because we were reducing in some buildings, and they were, but even those reassignments, generally when, in most cases with a reassignment, we talk to the person involved to say, I think some of the buildings even asked for volunteers and said who would like to go to Sand Hill next year. So.
We also had one educator who we assigned elementary buildings.
Oh, yes, we did. And again, he knew. It was an educator that we felt could really help another building. And we talked to him about that and just said, we feel like you have the skill set. This is what this building needs. This is why we'd like to move you. And he was, actually, he said in an email to both of us, he was so honored that we would even think of him when we were looking for this kind of person. But that was a reassignment. Yeah, thank you. Okay, Kiganza, and I just want to, you're going to see a lot of inexperience, which I'm sure you noticed as you went through this. And a lot of the people that are out there right now are inexperienced. But what I would point out at Kiganza is that we call people have no experience in initial educator. And you will notice, though, they're not all in one level. So they're spread out. There's someone that's new in kindergarten. Now, the learning strategists are both inexperienced. And that you're going to find because we could not find learning strategists. And again, that is not a Stoughton issue. Across, I don't know if I can say across the state, but in my area, when I get together with all of our HR directors, learning strategists were very difficult to
I
find.
think it's nationwide, actually.
I'm sorry?
I do think it's nationwide for what I have read.
It very well could be, yeah. So anyway, beyond that, then there's one in first grade, one in third grade, fourth, fifth, and art teachers. So they do have, you know, a group of people around them that have experience. There we go. Oops, sorry. High school, there, again, you can see where the vacancies were. Also, they were able to bring in some people with some really nice experience. And then there's some initials in there, but again, they're in different areas, one in science, one in math. At River Bluff, our social workers were both new, and our learning strategists. And then again, when you look at the core areas, it's spread out. It's language arts, PE, and science. And then, well, I'm sorry, this just continues River Bluff. And Sand Hill, again, looks like they're almost all new. But again, they are all at different levels. You have a kindergarten, second grade, third, fourth, and fifth grade. So there were that is why you approved the second mentor teacher position. We did need that second position. And I actually talked with Tara about it today. It's going well. Fonda Lewis is the second person that's in there. And there are a lot of supports, that we offer new teachers besides the mentor teacher. So I don't know if you have any questions or you want me to elaborate on that. Okay, yeah.
No, I don't need you to elaborate, but I would make a suggestion for a future agenda or spotlight on learning. Could we have them come in and just talk about what's going on? I did have a discussion with Tara over the weekend, and she can't say enough about the new teachers and like just some of the things they're bringing, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about what they're doing.
Definitely, we can have them present. That excellent idea.
And I think it's really great that Stoughton has the full release model. That isn't as common as districts that maybe have done more of a buddy kind of mentor type. So I think it's a really strong program here. And we expanded it a couple years ago where we support the second year teachers as well, not as often. But those mentor teachers are with those initial educators on a weekly basis. And those are two of our finest educators. I can't say enough about Tara Hutchins and Fonda Lewis. So they're getting very good mentoring. Okay, then we move on to Studer, and these are the questions that are asked on the employee engagement survey. And our survey results have gone down slightly from last year. We've gone kind of back and forth. So I think every year I stand up here and tell you that there's more that all of us can do to help our employees feel more engaged. It's just something that, I don't think we'll ever stop trying to do this better. And then the Studer parent said, I'm sorry?
I'm sorry. Can you go back?
I sure can.
Can that data be classified by question?
Yes.
So, and have you noticed which of the questions are
Yes.
the area that have been?
Yep.
So what happens is, we have them by schools, and so the principals roll this out. And so the principal will talk with their staff as far as, these are the ones that are the highest, here's the ones that are lowest, which ones do we want to work on together. They do the same thing with the parent ones. And then they focus on trying to do some strategies on the lowest question and try to bring it out. But they roll it out to the staff after it's administered and we get it back. And so we will be starting the next round with our staff. I think it opened up today with the next one. We usually do October, November, and then we do April, May type of one. So we're doing the next one right now as you speak. Today was the first day that it opened up.
I looked at that, the summary sheet, thinking maybe you might ask that. And it does differ, just what Tim is saying, it differs in buildings. And some buildings may have gone up from where they were last year, but as a district, we did not. But there were 3 questions that they highlighted in the summary, and they're not, they're like a 3.5, a 3.62, and a 3.64, so it isn't like they're, they're low, but they're not on a 5-point scale. They're not, beyond the halfway mark. But the questions that they identified were lower is that my supervisor or principal consults me on decisions that affect my job. Another one is my principal supervisor provides feedback concerning areas for improving my performance. And my principal supervisor provides feedback on my strengths as an employee. And then the other one that was lower, which personally I find really, I can't get my head around this one because this one has been lower, but the one that says they ask whether employees would recommend a parent select Stoughton Area School District for his or her child. And these are people who are working in our district who are rating this low. So that's concerning. We've talked about that as a group. That's very concerning that we're saying that about ourselves.
Becky, are we gonna see this broken down by schools at some point, or is that just not appropriate information for the board? And
Oh,
just throwing it out there.
yeah, and the Studer survey, while I'm reporting it, it really is housed in Tim's area.
So this next round, I'll share this when we get it done it's open, like I said, it's open today for the next couple of weeks. And when I get the feedback from this, which will usually be end of November, I'll share it with the board.
It'd just be nice to know if there's areas that are concerned, specific. Not just district average.
We've seen it broken down by
I thought
building
we had.
before, but.
All right, then there's the parent survey, and again, this is on a 4-point scale. So again, we went, if you look at the bottom, we are lower than we were last year. And, I mean, you can see the areas that have just gone down. We did go up in that they feel that we have a genuine concern for their children. That's very good. But the other areas are things that we're going to have to look at. And as Tim said, that's what they're specifically looking at in the buildings and trying to come up with strategies to improve that and, to help parents, understand what's going on in the buildings. And they definitely want to have families feel welcomed and well served.
Becky, when do we administer this survey?
The parent survey, isn't that at the end of the
It's
spring?
usually in
Like,
May.
yeah,
Okay. So this is from this last spring?
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
And we had people feeling, as they left the school year, that they were not as respected as, that one stands out to me as kind of a concern. I don't know how we address that. I'm assuming you guys have had conversations about that, but that's an intangible thing that's gonna affect all the rest of it, so.
Okay, then we're looking at length of service in the district. And broken out by 5-year increments. I thought it was really interesting to see, last time we noted that it was almost 50% of our staff were from 0 to 10 years, and now that's risen to about 60%. And again,
And that's in the district. That doesn't mean that some of the people that we've hired that fall into that category of 0 years, you saw one, like the learning strat, I think at Fox, that had 14 years of experience. They're still in that, this is to the district.
Right, to the district, exactly. Their hire date in the district, yeah. Past boards have been interested in the Cole Fellowship recipients. Last year we had 6 nominees in the district and 1 state winner. And I know Tim has provided you the information. That whole process has now moved outside of the local districts, which I think is okay, because it is now going to be considered, I think, probably more consistently at the CISA level. But we'll see how that goes this year, because I have no idea how many how many applicants they're going to have to review, and that's a big process. I did hear that they may be asking for some of us to volunteer to come to the CISAs to help with that, but it is a different process.
And since it goes right to the CISA, we have no way of knowing how many nominees we have from the district unless CISA shares it with us.
Right.
So, because it goes, the nomination, somebody can nominate a teacher. The teacher directly gets the email or notification of you've been nominated, here's the application. They fill out the application, it goes right to CISA, so we don't see it at all anymore.
All right, the next slide makes me sad, but it is what it is. And we did have the most turnover. What this is you're probably wondering why these districts. I've shared with you that I attend what started out as a Dane County HR group and now has expanded. And we have really invited anyone that has a human resources department and an administrator in that department. We invite them to come. And so when we are now doing our surveys and different things, it goes out to that whole group. So this is the response from that group. So that's yeah. It is what it is. It doesn't make us happy, and I think, I looked at that specifically to putting this together. Our exit interviews have improved as far as the number. We had 10 educators complete exit interviews for last year. I think the year prior to that, it was like maybe 2 or 3. I think it helped because one of the options is Donna had suggested making it an online option, and most of them are using the online option that did respond. But I did look at the main reason that they say that they're leaving. So there were 10. Of the 10, 2 said that they were leaving because they didn't feel valued. 3 said they either mentioned it or said it was because of the compensation plan. So if they even mentioned it in what they wrote, I included that. And so there were 3 that mentioned that. 1 mentioned the work environment. 2 felt that they needed better professional growth. 1 left because of administration, and the 10th person didn't give any reason at all.
Becky, how do these numbers compare with, say, the last 3-4 years? My recollection is that in years past, we were kind of in the middle of the pack. And I'm very surprised to see us having the highest turnover rate out of this whole group.
I know last year, Scott, we weren't at the bottom or top, or however you want to look at that. We weren't the worst, but we were really close. And I don't recall, I could go back and take a look at that if that's something you want me to pull.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to see, going back at least 3-4 years. The new compensation plan came online 2.5 years ago, and I'd like to...
15, 16.
Yeah, I mean, if we could go back to 13, 14, if you've got it that far back.
I don't know that I have it that far.
Yeah,
when
I know.
put out. I'll give you everything I have in the
Yeah.
survey, because it's been an ongoing.
That would be useful to see.
And if you can do that, can it be basically the identical information so we can compare
Apples to apples.
retirements and
Sure,
resignations?
yep, that's
'Cause
how it's collected every year.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Yep.
the resignations number that's really,
Right, what you will see,
Very.
you'll see Stoughton, but you may not see the exact same districts, because it all really depends on
Right.
who responds.
Right.
But you'll at least see where we fall in the districts that responded.
Doesn't the next slide address some of that?
Yeah, but this looks just at us. It doesn't,
Right.
I think they're asking for the comparison.
Oh, for the
Right.
complete
Yeah.
group,
Right.
okay.
Yeah. So yes, this is our own data, looking at what our percentage of retirements and then resignations and what our total number was. So it was a high number. It wasn't as high as we had in 14, 15, but again, it is a higher number.
It wasn't 14, 15, or was the whole implementation of the plan?
No, that was
No,
the year
it wasn't.
before. Yeah.
15, 16, it was the first year they were on the new compensation.
Why did we have that big spike in 15, 16? Is there any particular reason
For the
that?
retirements?
Yeah.
Didn't we offer?
yeah,
There
Was-
more in the-
offered.
Well,
That's right,
yeah.
that's right, that's right.
and we'll get to the retirement. I predict that although we have 22 people that are eligible to retire this year. And I'm just predicting, I have no idea. No one has talked to me, but we'll get to a slide. Because of a benefit, I predict that maybe that number of retirements will be higher again this year.
Because
So,
it really jumped after the passage of Act 10 for
Yes,
a lot of reasons.
yeah, everywhere,
Right, it wasn't just us.
right. So this just gives you just a visual of how many were eligible and how many actually retired. So this is what I was referencing. This is the last year that, and this isn't just educators. Well, it is and it isn't. The benefit, the $500 per month for 5 years, that's for educators only. And that has been a benefit. We've had that benefit in place, I think, forever. The dollar amount has changed. And so this is the highest that dollar amount has been. And so retirees will get $500 a month for 5 years or until the time that they're Medicare eligible. In the past, they could also stay on our insurance plan. And for those of you that were on the board last year, we recognized that that was something that was really increasing our insurance costs. So we grandfathered last year, and this year's folks can also stay on. If they retire this year, they can also stay on our plan, paying the premiums. They have to pay the full premium, but they could choose to stay on the district plan. That would be the reason that I predict that maybe we're going to see a higher number of retirees than anyone that retires after this year. They'll have to find their own insurance, but they still will get the money to pay the premium. It just will be a different plan. Again, just a visual looking at the number of resignations that we had in the different years and the total number of vacancies that we've had